Good evening. Thank you for this event, for considering Centro de Periodismo Investigativo for this year's Lyons Award for Conscience and Integrity in Journalism. Thank you, Nieman Fellows from Class 2020 and the Nieman Foundation for Journalists at Harvard for this honor. I'm going to take this opportunity to share some thoughts that we can discuss later. At CPI, we think that journalism can trigger social change. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Don't let skeptical and cynical people convince you that you cannot find hope for change in journalism, because you can. But trust can only be gained by independent, bulletproof, and consistent media that is ingrained and invested in the community it serves. Journalism is vital to democracy in this historic moment for the world. It has always been, but maybe it is in these times of data overload, misinformation, when good journalism strives and shines. It filters what is relevant, it explains, it shows, it compares, it analyzes. And maybe in Puerto Rico, where we have a democratic deficit that has showed its face more bluntly in the past few years, journalism truly makes a difference. Puerto Rico is a battleground full of challenges, ranging from colonialism and from social experimentation to barbaric disaster capitalism. This shows basically in the profound poverty and inequality that our people face. The US Census says that 44.9% of the people who live in Puerto Rico are below the poverty line, a number that is significantly higher than the US national average of 13.4. The Special Rapporteur for Extreme Poverty and Human Rights of the United Nations, Philip Alston, said after a recent visit to Puerto Rico, I quote, "The link between poverty and the absence of political rights is perfectly illustrated by Puerto Rico. If it were a state, it would be the poorest in the Union, but it is not a state. It is a mere territory." In this context, our Centro de Periodismo Investigativo, which is a nonprofit organization founded by journalists Omaya Sosa Pascual and Oscar Serrano 12 years ago, has been working steadily for a long time, mostly under the radar. We have been building credibility, establishing bonds of trust with people, with communities, with sources of information, and also training our journalists so they become a group of professionals who work with award-winning and international investigative journalism teams. Under the leadership of our first executive director, veteran journalist Laura Candelas, the tenacity of our founders, our board of directors, and of a team with deep commitment to their profession, and with the strength of the mission of seeking free access to information for the people, the CPI found its place in the media landscape among Puerto Rico readers. It was not an accident. The reduction of spaces for investigations in commercial media, the shutdown of environmental, cultural, or business supplements, and the layoff of journalists were decisive for the CPI to become more than ideal, necessary. At the same time, our body of work was built, CPI has been constantly growing sustainably. During the first 5 years, all work was essentially done by contract and freelance journalists. But we moved to find financial support in the US and then in Puerto Rico, and that allowed us to start formalizing employment for our journalists and a small administrative team. Very small. We still are just a few, but we do a lot, as many nonprofits do. I started as a freelance journalist, then as an editor, and finally as the executive director when Laura decided to retire. My approach to the organization has been to structure and formalize 3 program areas investigative reporting, of course, freedom of information litigation, and training to journalists. All three areas are intertwined and work collaboratively, not always like an orchestra, but more like a salsa band. We have established important links with universities that offer specific training on specialized issues or skills, or send us interns or invite us to events where we can present and sometimes mentor young journalists. We have collaborated with media outlets such as Quartz, Miami Herald, Associated Press, New York Magazine, CNN. This year, for the first time, we have been on a tour visiting Puerto Rican diasporas, listening and learning about how they see our work, what issues affect them, and starting a conversation about how can we be relevant to them. 3.5 Puerto Ricans are in the mainland, in Puerto Rico mainland, and 3.4 Puerto Ricans are in the US mainland. We have been to North Carolina, Connecticut, New York, Chicago. We'll be in California pretty soon. Because after all, there are more Puerto Ricans in the US right now than on the island, and we do have to listen to their needs. Trying to do so, we have made investigations in the past years, such as after the hurricane, when we reported on how displaced people were being treated when seeking shelter in New York City, or when we captured the strong history of the Puerto Rican community in Chicago, while investigating and trying to make sense of how it has changed since Hurricane Maria. In the past month, we have kept an eye on core issues for our country, the reconstruction and recovery after Maria, and also the government corruption in the administration of now former Governor Ricardo Rosselló. More recently, as if we didn't have our hands full, the earthquakes. Los Chavos de Maria project is an initiative that emerged when we realized that there was no model for climate disaster journalism. When we examined the experiences of Sandy and Katrina, we saw that there was, beyond coverage within the daily media, there was not an independent recovery reporting model dedicated to explaining the process, analyzing the data, and investigating how these funds were being used. With the support of Puerto Rico Foundation's network, this initiative was launched last year, and it already has dozens of reports that have had resonance and results. For example, a couple months ago, we managed to extend the period for the transsexual community in Puerto Rico and other groups to request assistance, individual assistance from FEMA. We also managed for the Controller's Office in Puerto Rico to introduce a coding for the contracts given with recovery funds to be able to follow them, something that was not happening. These are all small victories, and anyone would say maybe not important, but at the same time, they are changes that mean a lot to vulnerable communities. Above all, on the webpage, you will find stories of people who are supposed to be experiencing a recovery process that has yet to come. Finally, the Telegram chat, a story that achieved significant changes, not only political, but also cultural. Never before it had been on the lips of all people, of family conversations, at workplaces, in the media, among youngsters, there's such a strong rejection to corruption. When we got the chat and did the report that was published that morning at 2 a.m., our message was clear. It was not just a problem of character, of people calling names or insulting or insensitive officials. There were illegalities, political campaign work done with public resources, sharing confidential information that could benefit their friends' private clients, and in the end, abuse of power. We supported the shot publication 4 years later, with a story that categorically documented widespread corruption in the Rosselló administration. And we already know the outcome. But the job is far from done. Puerto Rico awaits for these people to be held accountable. The result of investigations being conducted by both local and federal justice department are still pending, although 14 members of Rosselló administration and close friends, according to local media today, were pointed by local Department of Justice for illicit enrichment, for unjustified enrichment, and offering bribes. There is a sense of impunity among Puerto Rican citizens, and we at the Centro de Periodismo Investigativo will continue to report on this. Besides government corruption, Puerto Rico has faced and will continue to face monumental challenges. In 2016, the Fiscal Control Board was undemocratically imposed by the U.S. federal government. It continues to dictate the island's fiscal policy, imposing budget and long-term fiscal plans, leading debt negotiations, vetoing locally approved laws. Its decisions have directly affected and continue to affect the most vulnerable sectors in Puerto Rico. And we at Centro de Periodismo will continue to report on them and fight them in court when they try to hide their decision-making process and operations behind the veil of immunity and secrecy. We already have done it and will continue to do so. There is also the slow bureaucratic recovery process since Hurricanes Maria and Irma devastated the island in 2017. Millions of dollars in disaster recovery money seem to be flowing through the bureaucracy of local and federal government, as well as the private sector, but not the people. Almost 90% of the money is going into the pockets of U.S. companies instead of Puerto Rican. The process has been held hostage to corruption, including from federal government, as well as political games. Puerto Rico people needs each and every single cent of this money. And we at Centro de Periodismo will continue to keep track of this complex yet critical process with reporting projects such as Los Chavos de Maria. 2020 is election year in Puerto Rico, and this next election will not be business as usual. There is a lot of skepticism and mistrust among voters. We must do creative reporting that is relevant and helps voters make informed decisions. And then there is a seemingly never-ending issue of the island's political status, an issue that goes across and each one of our stories. Puerto Rico is a colony, and almost a quarter into the 21st century, it continues to hang in a limbo that affects each and every one of Puerto Ricans, regardless of their political views. We have a lot of work to do, and we will do it. Looking into the list of winners, since 1964, I was overwhelmed by CPI being chosen to be here tonight. So many references whose work is pivotal to the values of journalism that we follow at CPI, and especially very important figures from Latin American journalism like Marcela Turati and Monica Gonzalez, who make us so proud and have been, in a way, our mentors. It feels good to be recognized, and it also puts a lot of responsibility in our shoulders, and we will be up to the task. There are people here tonight that have supported the center for a long time and have been generous and respectful of our work. Thank you for that. Thanks to our community, to our readers, if they follow this transmission, this award goes to you, to your longstanding tradition of resistance and pride. And it goes, of course, to our team in Puerto Rico, whose outstanding and engaging work makes me proud every day. Thank you.